Marble pillar hard enough to bruise. You are not walking in with me tonight, he said through his teeth. Use the side door. Tell anyone who asks that you're with the catering staff. Clara stared at the man she had sold her dead mother's jewelry to keep alive. The man she had saved. The man whose name was on the building they were standing in front of. His eyes didn't flinch, no guilt, no shame about the shame. Only calculation. She was 53 years old and her husband had just told her to enter through the servants' entrance. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The night it all began to unravel, the sky above Beverly Hills was the kind of perfect that only rich people seemed to deserve. Stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. The air smelled of gardenias and expensive cologne, and the kind of quiet money buys when it wants to pretend the world has no sharp edges. Inside the Whitmore estate, every surface gleamed. The marble floors caught the light from crystal chandeliers. Catered trays moved through rooms filled with politicians. Investors, celebrities, the entire machinery of American power dressed in black tie and practiced smiles. And Clara Whitmore stood at the top of the staircase. Alone, she wore a deep burgundy gown she had spent 3 weeks searching for. The kind of gown designed for a woman who wanted to feel beautiful without apologizing for taking up space. It draped around her in a way that was elegant and soft and real. She had done her own hair. She had chosen her grandmother's pearl earrings. She had stood in front of the mirror for 20 minutes talking herself into believing she deserved to walk down those stairs. She took the first step. From across the room she saw Alexander. Her husband, the man whose company had just been named one of the top 5 fastest-growing tech empires in the country. The man whose face was on the cover of Forbes. The man whose voice had once whispered against her hair in a cold apartment in Chicago. Clara, we're going to change the world, I know we are. You and me. He was laughing at something a tall blonde woman in a backless dress was saying. His laugh was the same one she had fallen in love with 15 years ago. Easy, wide, full of light, but when he looked up and saw Clara on the stairs, the laugh died, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else in that room would have noticed. But Clara noticed, she always noticed. She watched his eyes flick toward the people nearest to him. She watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She watched him make a decision, a small, quiet, devastating decision in less than 3 seconds. He turned back to the blonde woman and laughed again. Clara kept walking down the stairs. She smiled. She reached the bottom. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. And she stood there like a woman waiting for a bus she already knew was never coming. 20 minutes passed before Alexander approached her. He was alone when he reached her side. He leaned close. His cologne, the one she had given him for their 7th anniversary, filled her lungs. I need you to do something for me tonight, he said quietly. She looked at him. What? The Harrington Group is here. They're finalizing the partnership deal. They're very image-conscious. He picked a non-existent piece of lint from his sleeve. Just if anyone asks, let me do the introductions. Clara turned her glass slowly in her hands. What does that mean, Alexander? It just means let me control the narrative tonight. That's all. She knew what it meant. She had known what it meant for months. It meant don't say you're my wife. It meant let me pretend you are someone else's problem. It meant your body, your face, the way you look in photographs, all of it is a liability I can't afford right now. All right, she said. She said it quietly, without drama. Because that was who Clara Bennett Whitmore was. She had never been a woman who screamed in public. She had never been a woman who made scenes. She absorbed. She swallowed. She survived. She had been surviving Alexander's shame for 3 years. It started the year after his company went public. The year the money stopped being an idea and became a reality so enormous it changed the very atmosphere around him. Before that, they were simply Alex and Clara. 2 people who had met in a business school study group in their mid-20s, who had argued about marketing strategy over bad coffee and fallen in love over even worse pizza. Two people who had gotten married in a courthouse with 12 friends and a second-hand dress because there was no money for anything else. Clara had been the one with the plan. She had studied entrepreneurship with a ferocity that surprised even her professors. When Alexander's first company, a logistics software startup, ran out of funding in its second year, it was Clara who sat with the spreadsheets until 2 in the morning. It was Clara who called investors. It was Clara who identified the pivot that saved everything. It was Clara who sold the diamond XRMF had left the only valuable thing she owned to cover payroll, one terrible payroll, when the bank account hit zero. She had never told Alexander that part, not the full truth of it. She had said she found a way. He had hugged her and kissed her forehead and said she was the most resourceful woman he had ever known. He meant it then, she believed he meant it then, but success has a way of rewriting people. Not all at once, gradually, like water carving stone. You don't notice the change until the shapes get completely different. The first sign was small, a comment at a dinner party 3 months after the IPO, when a colleague's wife remarked that the power couple of Silicon Valley was finally getting the attention they deserved. "Oh, Alexander mostly works alone," he had said with a smile. Clara keeps the home running. She had been sitting right beside him. She kept the smile on her face for the rest of the night. When they got home, she asked him about it, just gently. Just a question. He told her she was being oversensitive. The second sign came 6 months later. She had flown out to join him at a conference in New York. She had packed carefully. She had bought a new dress. She had been excited in the way she hadn't been excited about anything in a long time, the simple, fragile excitement of wanting to spend time with her husband. He met her in the hotel lobby, and his expression told her everything before his words did. "I thought you weren't coming until Thursday," he said. "I moved my schedule around. I wanted to surprise you." Something moved across his face. Something she didn't have a name for yet. "Clara, I have back-to-back meetings this week. I know. I'm not here to interfere. I wanted to see you." He had nodded slowly. He had taken her bag. He had kissed her cheek in the mechanical way. People kiss cheeks when their minds are somewhere else entirely. That night at the conference dinner, he sat her at a table on the far end of the room. Different table from his, different world. She ate alone, surrounded by strangers. And she told herself it was the logistics. It was the seating arrangements. It was just one difficult evening. She was very good at telling herself things. The third sign, the one she could not explain away, happened 14 months later at the Whitmore Foundation Gala. Their own charity event. Their name on the wall. Their money funding the whole evening. A journalist from a major lifestyle magazine had approached them near the entrance. Cameras, recorder. The genuine, bright-eyed energy of someone who had been waiting for this moment. "Mr. Whitmore, can we get a photo with you and your wife?" And Alexander had said with the smoothness of a man who had practiced this, "Oh, I came alone tonight. Let me introduce you to my chief of staff." James. Clara had been standing 6 inches to his left. The journalist had blinked in confusion. Clara had turned and walked toward the bar. She did not cry. She ordered sparkling water. She stood with perfect posture and spoke pleasantly to 3 different people about 3 different things she couldn't remember an hour later. And when Alexander found her an hour after that, he acted as though nothing had happened. As though she were imagining it. As though the woman standing 6 inches to his left had been invisible. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm fine," she said. "You look tired." And there it was. The thing underneath the thing. The real conversation happening inside the polite one. Clara had gained weight in the years since the company went public. Not enormously, not in the dramatic way stories sometimes tell it. But enough. Enough that her body had changed in ways she could see every morning in the mirror. Enough that the stress of watching her marriage collapse from the inside, of eating lunch alone in a mansion with 14 rooms, of wondering what she had done wrong, and if she could fix it, all of that had settled on her in a physical way she couldn't entirely control. She had tried, she had hired a personal trainer, she had changed her diet. She had done every single thing a woman in her position is told to do when the world decides her body is a problem. But her body was not the problem. She knew that, on some level. She had always known that. The problem was that Alexander Whitmore had confused his success with his worth, and in doing so he had decided that everything around him needed to match the image he had created. The cars, the house, the staff, the wife. She was the one thing that didn't fit the picture anymore. Not because she was less, but because he'd become someone who only saw surfaces. The night of the gala, the one where he asked her to pretend she was the housekeeper, she moved through the rooms like a ghost. She watched her husband charm every person in the building. She watched him command space with the effortless authority of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be afraid. She watched the blonde woman in the backless dress touch his arm 3 separate times, and she counted each one. She was not angry. She was something worse than angry. She was disappearing. She could feel it, the way a person disappears when no one looks at them anymore. Not all at once, a little at a time. First the voice goes quiet. Then the opinions stop mattering. Then you stop being a person in a room and start being furniture. She had been furniture in her own marriage for 2 years. Around 11 o'clock, she left the main hall and found a quieter corridor near the library. She just needed a moment, a few minutes of not performing the role of a woman who was fine. She sat on a small bench near the window. The voices from the party floated through the walls, muffled and distant. She closed her eyes, she breathed. And then she heard them, Alexander's voice and his mother's voice. Margaret Whitmore was a woman who had grown up with money, lost it, clawed it back, and never quite forgiven the world for making her work that hard. She was sharp and elegant and brutally practical in the way people become when they have spent their whole lives treating life as a strategy. She loved her son in her way, but Margaret Whitmore's love came with conditions. Long, detailed, very specific conditions. Clara heard her mother-in-law's voice through the cracked door of the adjoining sitting room. "You built a billion-dollar empire," Margaret said. "Why are you still carrying the embarrassment of your past?" Clara's hand went still against her knee. She waited 1 second, 2, 3. She waited for Alexander to say something. Anything, to push back, to defend, to simply say the name Clara in a tone that meant she mattered. The silence stretched. "Mother," Alexander finally said. "I'm not saying it to be cruel. I'm saying it because I'm the only person in your life with the courage to say it. You have investors watching everything about you right now. You have Harrington's team assessing you as a leader. And every time someone Googles your personal life, I know, then you understand what needs to happen." Another silence. Best. "I know," he said again. "Not, she's my wife and I love her. Not, Clara built this with me. Not, you don't know what you're talking about. Just, I know." Clara stood up. She didn't make a sound. She was very good at not making sounds. She walked back through the corridor, back into the main hall, back into the noise and the champagne and the performing of a woman who was fine. She found a corner near the far windows and she stood there until the gala ended. She rode home in the car beside her husband. He talked about the Harrington deal the entire drive. She nodded in the right places. She made the right sounds. She was very good at this by now. When they got home, he went to his study. She went to their bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed in her burgundy gown. She sat there for a long time, and for the first time in 2 years of swallowing and surviving and telling herself things, Clara Bennett Whitmore stopped telling herself things. She let herself hear what she had actually heard, embarrassment of his past. She was his past, she was his embarrassment. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs and she felt something move inside her. Something quiet and certain and completely different from grief. Something that had been buried under 2 years of accommodation and patience and hope. It was not anger exactly, it was a decision. She didn't know yet what the decision was. She didn't have a plan, she didn't have a next step. She was just a woman sitting on a bed in a gown she had spent 3 weeks choosing, and she was finally letting herself acknowledge the truth. She had not been living inside a troubled marriage. She had been living inside a slow erasure, and erasure only works if the person being erased cooperates. The next morning she woke before Alexander. She made coffee. She stood in the kitchen, the enormous, gleaming, magazine-ready kitchen that she had never particularly liked, and she held the mug in both hands and she waited. When he came in, he was already dressed, already in motion, already inhabiting the version of himself that belonged to the world. "Alexander," she said. He poured coffee without looking at her. "Morning, I need to ask you something." Something in her voice made him turn. She had never used that voice with him before. She wasn't sure she had ever had that voice before. It was the voice of a woman who had decided to stop cooperating with her own erasure. "Are you ashamed of me?" she asked. The question landed in the room like something physical. She watched his face. She had known this man for 15 years. She had memorized the geography of his expressions, the way his left eye tightened when he was calculating, the way he looked slightly to the right when he was choosing his words carefully, the particular stillness that came over him when he was about to say something he didn't quite believe. She watched all of it happen now, in sequence, in the span of about 4 seconds. He said, "That's not a fair question. It's the only question," she said. "Clara, last night your mother called me the embarrassment of your past. And you said nothing." She set her mug down. "I heard you." He went very still. "I wasn't asking you to fight her," Clara continued. "I was just asking you to exist, to say, 'That's my wife,' just that. 3 words, it's complicated, is it? My mother says things. She said you should get rid of me. And you said, 'I know,' twice." Her voice stayed steady. She had practiced being steady for so long it had become a second nature she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. "So I need you to tell me. Is she right? Are you ashamed of who I am?" The silence that followed was the longest of her life. And then he said quietly, without meeting her eyes, "I think we both know things have changed." She breathed in slowly. "Things have changed," she repeated. "I'm not the same person I was. The company, the position I'm in now, it requires a different wife." He didn't deny it. That was when Clara understood completely. Not the partial understanding she had been living with. Not the careful, qualified, maybe I'm wrong understanding. The total, unambiguous, no more stories understanding. She picked up her coffee cup again. She looked out the window at the garden, the perfectly manicured garden she had designed herself, that she had spent months planning. That was genuinely one of the most beautiful things she had ever created. "All right," she said. He blinked. "Clara, you don't have to say anything else." She turned to look at him. "I heard everything I needed to hear. I've been hearing it for 2 years. I just needed to know you'd say it out loud." She set the cup in the sink. She walked out of the kitchen. She climbed the stairs. She went into the guest room, not their room. She couldn't go back into their room right now, and she sat on the floor with her back against the bed, and she let herself feel it. All of it, the whole 2 years of it. The galas and the empty seats and the introductions that didn't include her name. The business trips she wasn't invited on, the dinners she sat through alone. The journalist who blinked in confusion because she was standing 6 inches away and still invisible. The gown she had spent 3 weeks choosing, her grandmother's pearl earrings. The look on his face at the top of the stairs. She let herself feel every single piece of it. And then she stopped crying and she picked up her phone. And she called her college roommate, Diane, who lived in Chicago and had been telling her for 14 months to come visit. "Diane," she said when the call connected, "is that offer still open?" "Clara?" Diane's voice shifted instantly, the particular alertness of a friend who has been waiting for this call. "What happened? A lot of things," Clara said. "Can I come stay with you for a while?" "You can come forever," Diane said. When Clara looked around the guest room, at the beige walls, at the decorative throw pillows she hadn't chosen, at the painting above the dresser that she had never liked and had never said so. "Tomorrow," she said. 3 days later, Alexander left the divorce papers on the kitchen counter. He didn't present them dramatically. He didn't argue or plead or make a speech. He simply left them there with a handwritten note attached that read, "I think this is for the best. My attorney can work with yours." She stood in the kitchen and read the note twice. He had signed it with just his initial. She had known this man for 15 years, and he had signed the end of their marriage with a single letter. She found him in his study. He was on the phone. He held up one finger, the give me a minute gesture, and she waited. She stood in the doorway of his study and waited while he finished a business call. When he hung up, he looked at her carefully, as though assessing. "I saw the papers," she said. "I thought it was better to be clear." "Better for whom?" He exhaled slowly. "For both of us, Clara. We've been making each other unhappy for a long time." "You've been making me unhappy," she said. And the precision of it made him flinch. "I've been trying to save something you already decided to throw away." He had no answer for that. "What are you offering?" she asked. He named a number. A large number, a number that most people would consider life-altering in the best possible way. He mentioned the luxury apartment. He mentioned a monthly allowance. He mentioned several other provisions that his attorney had prepared. He was very generous with everything except the truth. She let him finish. She stood in the doorway of his study, the study she had helped furnish, in the house she had helped design, funded by the company she had helped save, and she let him explain all the ways he was willing to compensate her for the inconvenience of having loved him. "All right," she said. He blinked. He had clearly expected more resistance. More crying, more please, Alexander, please. She had given him 2 years of please. She was out of it. "I'll have my attorney look it over," she said. She turned to leave. "Clara," she stopped but didn't turn around. "I hope you know I don't think badly of you." His voice was careful. Constructed, the voice of a man managing optics even in his own home. "I hope you find don't," she said quietly. He stopped. "Don't finish that sentence," she said. "Don't tell me what you hope I find. You don't get to wish me well and also hand me papers in the same week. That's not how this works." She walked out. She signed the papers 4 days later. Her attorney had reviewed them. The settlement was fair by legal standards. She signed on the dotted line with her left hand because her right hand was shaking, and she refused to let it show on paper. Before she handed the documents back, she looked up at the notary who was witnessing the signature. The woman was about 60, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the patient face of someone who had witnessed too many of these endings to be surprised by them anymore. "Is he here?" the woman asked quietly, meaning Alexander. "No," Clara said. The woman nodded once. Not with pity, with the particular quiet acknowledgement of a person who understood exactly what that absence meant. Clara handed the papers back. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the attorney's office into the afternoon light. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Los Angeles hummed around her. Traffic, a food truck 2 blocks down, someone somewhere playing music through a window. The city going about the enormous, ordinary business of existing. She thought about the apartment Alexander was offering. She thought about the monthly allowance. She thought about how easy it would be to take both. To settle in, to become a comfortable, funded ghost. She thought about the woman who had sat with the spreadsheets until 2 in the morning. The woman who had called investors. The woman who had sold her mother's earrings. She thought about what that woman would say. She pulled out her phone and called Diane. "I signed," she said. "Oh, Clara, I'm not going to take the apartment." She looked up at the sky. Clear blue, limitless. "I'm coming to Chicago." "Yes," Diane said immediately. "Yes, come. I don't have a plan. You'll make one." "You always make one." Clara breathed in the afternoon air. Something moved in her chest, not grief, not quite. Something older and more fundamental. The feeling of a thing coming to an end so that another thing can find its edges. She had walked into this marriage with everything she was. She was walking out with the same thing. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was more than enough. "Book me a flight," she said. "Already on it," Diane said, "and Clara Bennett, not Whitmore." Never Whitmore again, she decided right there on the sidewalk, walked to her car in the afternoon light with one thought clear and bright and certain in her mind. She was not done, she was not broken, she was not the embarrassment of anyone's past. She was, in fact, just beginning. She didn't know yet what she was beginning toward. She didn't know about Chicago. She didn't know about the company she would build from a kitchen table and a borrowed laptop. She didn't know about the investors who would underestimate her and the ones who would not. She didn't know about the stores or the awards or the headlines. And she couldn't have known about the boy who would arrive 7 months later and become the center of her entire world. The boy with Alexander's eyes, the boy she would name Noah. The boy whose existence would one day change everything. All she knew, standing on that sidewalk, was that she was Clara Bennett. And she was still here, and she was still whole, and somewhere inside the body that had become someone else's reason to look away, her heart was still beating with the same stubborn, impossible, magnificent insistence it had always had. She got in the car, she drove away, and the mansion in Beverly Hills got smaller in the rearview mirror, and then smaller still, and then disappeared entirely. She did not look back. The flight to Chicago left at 6:45 in the morning. Clara sat in economy class not because she couldn't afford business. The settlement Alexander offered would have paid for a private jet. But she had made a decision on that sidewalk outside the attorney's office, a quiet, bone-deep decision that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with who she intended to become. She was starting over, she was starting honest. Economy class felt honest. She had one carry-on bag, a laptop she had bought herself 3 years ago and barely used, and a notebook filled with ideas she had been writing down for 18 months. Ideas she had never showed Alexander. Ideas she had been too afraid to take seriously, because taking them seriously would have meant admitting that the life she was living wasn't enough for her. Diane picked her up from O'Hare in a 10-year-old Honda with a cracked dashboard and a back seat full of her kids' soccer gear. When Clara got in the car and closed the door, Diane looked at her for a long moment. Really looked. The way only a person who has known you since you were 22 can look, scanning not just your face but the whole landscape of you. What's missing, what's new, what's been damaged, and what's somehow, improbably, still standing. You look terrible, Diane said. I know, you also look like yourself. For the first time in a long time, you look like yourself. Clara didn't have an answer for that. She turned to look out the window as Diane pulled into traffic. I have nothing, Clara said after a moment. You have everything, Diane said flatly. You just see it yet, Clara almost argued. She stopped herself, because Diane had been right about most things for 30 years, and Clara was tired of being the person who argued when she should have been listening. She stayed in Diane's spare room for the first 2 weeks. She slept a lot. She ate real food at a real table with Diane's family, 2 teenage daughters, and a husband named Patrick, who coached youth baseball and never asked Clara a single uncomfortable question, which was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in years. She started filling the notebook, not business plans yet. Just thinking, just the raw material of a person sorting through the rubble of one life, and trying to identify what was worth carrying into the next one. She wrote about food. She had always written about food. It was one of the things Alexander had charming about her in the early years. Her obsession with the connection between what people eat and how they feel. She wrote about what it meant to eat well when you were exhausted, when you were grieving, when your body had become the site of someone else's judgment. She wrote about what she had desperately wanted in the worst years of her marriage. Not expensive food, not perfect food, nourishing food. Real food, the kind that reminds you your body is worth taking care of. She wrote for 4 hours one Tuesday morning and looked up and realized she had the beginning of something. It wasn't a business plan, it was a philosophy. And everything she had ever built had started with a philosophy. She called Diane into the kitchen and read her 3 pages of it out loud. When she finished, Diane was quiet for a moment. That's a company, Diane said. It's an idea, Clara. Diane sat down across from her. That's a company, that's a brand, that's a product line and a mission statement and a customer base all in one document. Clara looked down at the pages. I don't have investors. I don't have capital. I don't have a team. I don't even have an address that isn't your spare room. So? Alexander didn't have any of that when you two started either. Diane paused to let that land. And he had you. Right now you have you. That's actually a better starting position. Clara laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in 3 weeks, and it surprised her, the sound of it. Sudden and real and a little rough around the edges, like something that had been locked in a room and forgotten. She used $20,000 of the settlement, a small fraction, carefully chosen to incorporate the business in Illinois. She named it Bennett Naturals, her name, her word. No one else's. The concept was simple and specific, and she believed genuinely needed, healthy food products. Not the kind of healthy that tasted like cardboard and judgment. The kind that tasted like someone had made it for you because they wanted you to feel good. Premium ingredients, real flavors. Packaging that was beautiful without being intimidating. Products designed for people who had spent too long being told that taking care of themselves was either a vanity or a luxury they couldn't afford. She knew who she was making it for. She was making it for herself. The version of herself that had sat alone in a 14-room mansion eating takeout because she was too tired to cook for one and too sad to care. She started small, a product line of 6 items. She tested everything in Diane's kitchen, dragging Patrick and the girls into blind taste tests until they begged for mercy. Mom says if you make us try one more energy bar, she's filing for divorce, Patrick's oldest daughter told her once a Saturday morning with the brutal honesty of a 15-year-old. That's fair, Clara said, and reformulated the bar anyway. She worked 16-hour days. She researched suppliers. She built a website herself, watching tutorial videos at midnight, making mistakes and correcting them and making new ones. She wrote the copy for every product page personally because no one else knew what she was trying to say. She sent her business plan to 11 investors in the first month. 8 didn't respond, 2 sent form rejections. One, a man named Gerald Foster, who ran a mid-sized venture fund in downtown Chicago, agreed to a meeting. She showed up 15 minutes early. She sat in the lobby of his office building, in the blazer she had owned for 6 years and pressed carefully the night before. She had her pitch deck on her laptop. She had her samples in a cooled bag. She had her numbers memorized. Gerald Foster was sharp-eyed and had the particular patience of a man who had heard 10,000 pitches and was looking for the 1% that were real. He let her get through the first 5 minutes without interrupting. Then he leaned back. "Walk me through your exit strategy," he said. She did. He asked about distribution. She answered. He asked about her manufacturing relationships. She answered. Then he looked at her across the desk and asked the question she had known was coming. "What's your background? Why are you the right person to build this?" She told him. Not the Clara Whitmore version, the polished, edited, married to a billionaire version, the real version. The study groups and the bad coffee and the logistics startup and the February when the bank account hit 0. The pivot she had engineered, the investors she had called. The earrings she had sold. She didn't mention Alexander by name. She didn't need to. Gerald Foster listened without expression. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to be straight with you, please," she said. "Your concept is solid. Your numbers are realistic. Your passion is obvious." He paused. "But I have concerns about market saturation in the premium health food space, and I have concerns about whether a first-time solo founder can execute at the pace this plan requires." Clara kept her face even. "Those are legitimate concerns," she said. "Can I respond to them?" He gestured. "Go ahead." She took him through her competitive analysis. She showed him the gap in the market she had identified, not just the product gap, but the emotional gap. The specific underserved customer who wanted premium quality without the aesthetic of a brand that made them feel excluded from their own health. She showed him her pre-launch survey data, 312 responses. 81% from women over 40, 93% reporting they felt underserved by existing premium health brands. She showed him everything she had. When she finished, Foster looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not going to invest today," he said. Her stomach dropped. "But I want to see your 6-month numbers." Come back in June with real data and I'll give you a real answer. She picked up her bag. She extended her hand across the desk. I'll see you in June, she said. She walked out of his office building into the February cold and stood on the sidewalk and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of feeling the disappointment. The full weight of it, the fact that she had needed that yes and hadn't gotten it, and the road ahead was longer than she had hoped. 30 seconds, then she pulled out her phone and called her first potential retail partner. She had a list. She worked the list. The first Bennett Naturals products hit 3 independent health food stores in Chicago 6 weeks later. Consignment terms, tiny margins, but real shelves. Real customers, real data. She drove to each store herself every other day for the first month. She talked to the people who ran the registers. She asked what customers were saying. She listened to every piece of feedback with the same intensity she had given Gerald Foster's pitch meeting. She reformulated 2 products based on what she heard. She added a 4th flavor to the bar line because 3 different store employees mentioned that customers were asking for it. She built a small social media presence, not a polished, expensive one, a real one she posted from her phone. She talked about what she was making and why she was making it in the same direct, no performance tone she used when she talked to Diane across the kitchen table. She didn't perform expertise, she performed honesty. People responded to honesty. By the end of the 3rd month, she was moving enough product that she needed to find a co-manufacturer. By the end of the 4th month, she had expanded into 7 stores. By the end of the 5th month, she had 3 independent investors, small amounts, real believers, and a waiting list from 2 regional Greek street chains who had heard about her through a food industry newsletter that had written a small piece about Bennett Naturals. The piece was 4 paragraphs. It ran in a newsletter with 40,000 subscribers. Clara read it on her phone at 6 in the morning, sitting on the edge of Diane's spare room bed. She had to edge it 3 times because she needed to make sure it was real. They called her a founder with an unusually clear point of view and an even clearer understanding of her customer. They called Bennett Naturals a brand to watch. She put the phone down on the bed. She pressed both hands over her mouth, and she cried not from grief this time, not from the long, complicated grief that had been her companion, since the night she heard the word embarrassment through a cracked door, but from something else entirely. Something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Pride. She was proud of herself. She called Diane. "Did you see it?" Diane said before Clara could speak. "I just read it, Clara." Diane's voice was thick. "I need you to understand something. I need you to hear me say this. I knew you when you were 22 years old and completely broke, and you had more intelligence and drive than anyone I had ever met in my life. And then I watched that man, I watched what happened to you in that marriage, and she stopped. Collected herself. "I am so proud of you I could burst." Clara pressed her hand harder against her mouth. "Don't make me cry again," she managed. "I have a call with a distributor in 40 minutes, Diane laughed. Go do your call, but remember this moment, say, whatever happens next, remember how this felt." She went in June to see Gerald Foster. She arrived again 15 minutes early, same lobby. But she was different from the woman who had sat in that lobby in February. Not visibly, maybe, not in a way a stranger would have noticed. But she felt different in her own body, more settled, more certain, more at home in the space she was taking up. She laid her 6-month data on his desk. He studied it for 4 minutes without speaking. When he looked up, his expression had shifted. "Your reorder rate," he said. 78%, she said. "That's remarkable. For a new brand, I know. Your customer acquisition cost down 40% from month 2 to month 6, she said. Because our customers are doing the acquisition for us. Word of mouth. We're not spending on advertising. People are telling other people." He set down the papers. He looked at her. "What do you need?" he said. She told him. He said yes. She walked out of Gerald Foster's office with a check, not a metaphorical check, an actual commitment letter that would become a check, and she sat in her car in the parking garage, and she gripped the steering wheel with both hands, and she said out loud, To no one, just to the concrete walls and the fluorescent light and the particular stillness of a decision that had just become real. "You're doing it, Clara." She drove back to Diane's house. She had been meaning to find her own apartment for months. Had been meaning to stop imposing on Diane's family. Had told herself she'd move when things settled. But things had not exactly settled, they had accelerated. Dramatically and continuously, in the way that real growth accelerates once it finds its footing. When she got home, Diane had made dinner. The whole family was at the table. Patrick, the girls, and there was a bottle of wine open in the middle of the table and a card propped. Clara picked up the card. On the outside it said, "For the woman who is just getting started." Inside, in Diane's handwriting, "We already knew, we just waited for you to know too. Now go be enormous." Clara put the card down on the table. "I'm moving out next month," she said. Diane's younger daughter looked up. "About time." Everyone laughed. Clara laughed, and she sat down at that table, in that house that had been her refuge, and she had dinner with the people who had held her while she rebuilt herself. And for the first time since she had walked out of that Beverly Hills mansion with one suitcase, she felt genuinely, completely, without qualification. All right, but she did not know, sitting at that table, laughing at a 15-year-old's brutal honesty, that she was 6 weeks away from a discovery that would change everything. She had noticed things over the past couple of months. Small things, the kind of things a woman in her early 50s might dismiss or explain away. Fatigue that didn't respond to sleep, a sensitivity that felt different from her usual rhythms, a quiet change in her body that she had been too busy and too focused to examine. She told herself it was stress, the company, the upheaval of the past year. She made an appointment with her doctor because Diane told her to stop ignoring her body. "I'm fine," Clara said. "You keep saying that," Diane said. "And then you keep finding out you weren't." The doctor's office was on a Tuesday afternoon. She had a distributor call scheduled for 4 o'clock. She planned to be in and out. She was not in and out. She sat across from her doctor, a calm, careful woman named Dr. Okafor, who had been her physician for 2 years, and listened to words that did not compute. Not at first. She made Dr. Okafor repeat them. Dr. Okafor did not flinch. She repeated them clearly and with the particular gentleness of someone who had delivered this specific kind of news before, and understood that the seconds immediately after it required absolute steadiness. Clara sat very still. She did the math quickly, automatically, the way she did math with the precision of a woman who had always been better with numbers than most people expected. The timing aligned with the last time she and Alexander had been the last time before everything. Before the gala, before the conversation through the door, before the papers on the kitchen counter. She sat in that doctor's office with her hands flat on her knees, and she felt the world rearrange itself around her again. For the second time in 8 months, and this time she couldn't tell if it was breaking or building or both at once. "Are you all right?" Dr. Okafor asked. Clara breathed in slowly. "I'm going to need a minute," she said. She took the minute. She sat in the parking lot of the doctor's office for 45 minutes after the appointment. She called no one. She just sat with it, the staggering, terrifying, enormous reality of what she had just learned. She was building a company. She was rebuilding a life. She was doing it alone, on purpose, with everything she had. And now this. She thought about Alexander. She thought about what this information would mean, legally, practically, in every complicated dimension. She thought about what it would require of her. She thought about the child. The person who did not yet know they existed in the world. The person who was arriving whether she was ready or not. She pressed both hands flat against her stomach. She thought of her mother, of the diamond earrings she had sold and never gotten back, of the ways her mother had quietly, without drama, without complaint, made every sacrifice look small so that Clara would never feel burdened by being loved. She made a decision. She had always made decisions alone. She was very good at it. She picked up her phone. She called her distributor and rescheduled. Then she called Diane. "I need you to come outside," she said. "I'm in the parking lot of the medical center on Halstead." "What? Why, are you okay?" Clara looked out through the windshield at the sky. The same enormous, limitless sky she had looked at on the sidewalk outside the attorney's office. The sky that didn't particularly care about anyone's plans. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I will be." "Come sit with me." Diane was there in 11 minutes. She got in the passenger seat without asking questions. Clara told her. Diane was silent for 10 seconds, which was, for Diane, an extraordinary length of time. Then she reached over and took Clara's hand. "Okay," Diane said. "Okay," Clara said. "What do you need?" Clara thought about it seriously. What did she need? She had a business gaining momentum. She had investors. She had a company she had built from a notebook and a borrowed kitchen table. She had a philosophy and a product and a customer who needed her. And she was going to have a child. "I need to find an apartment," Clara said. "A real one with an extra room." Diane squeezed her hand so hard it almost hurt. "I know a great real estate agent," she said. And Clara, who had been told she was an embarrassment, who had been handed papers on a kitchen counter, who had been sent through a side entrance like staff, who had signed her name to the end of one life with a shaking right hand, Clara Bennett sat in that parking lot and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, something more active than peace. Something that knew what it was doing. She was not the woman Alexander Whitmore had discarded. She had never been that woman. That woman had never existed. There was only this one, the one who got up, the one who kept going. The one who was, even now, making a plan. She had a company to build, and now she had a reason that was bigger than herself. She started the car. Noah arrived on a Thursday morning in April. 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and a cry so immediate and certain it sounded like an Essex. Clara had been in labor for 11 hours. Diane had been there for all 11. Sitting in the chair beside the bed, holding Clara's hand during the hard parts and telling terrible jokes during the less hard parts. Because that was who Diane was, the person who understood that sometimes the greatest kindness was refusing to let a moment become only tragic. When it was over and the nurse placed Noah against Clara's chest, Clara stopped breathing for a moment, not from pain. Not from exhaustion, from the sudden, total rearranging truth of him. He was here, he was real, he was hers. She looked at his face, at the particular arrangement of features that were familiar in a way that had nothing to do with genetics and everything to do with the fact that this was her son. And she felt something happen inside her that she did not have language for and did not need language for. "Hi," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you." Diane was crying. Clara didn't realize it until she heard her sniff. "Don't," Clara said without looking up from Noah. "I'm not," Diane said, clearly crying. "You are. I have allergies in April. It's a bad year for pollen." Clara laughed. Noah startled at the sound and then settled again, and that the small, instinctive way he settled at the sound of her voice undid her completely. She cried. Diane cried. The nurse pretended to be very busy with something on the other side of the room. She named him Noah because she had always loved the name, and because it meant rest, and because rest was the thing she had been unable to find for 2 years, and was determined to build a library now. A life with enough room in it for rest, for joy, for a child who deserved a mother who was whole. She did not contact Alexander. She had thought about it. She had thought about it carefully and honestly, the way she thought about everything. She had sat with the question for months through the pregnancy, through the business growth, through the long nights when the combination of physical exhaustion and the weight of building something from nothing pressed down on her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had an attorney, a good one, a woman named Patricia Huang, who had handled her divorce and had since become something closer to an advisor than a legal representative. Clara had asked Patricia about her obligations. She had asked honestly, without the performance of a woman who had already decided she genuinely wanted to know what was right. Patricia had been direct. "You're under no legal obligation to contact him proactively," Patricia said. He has a right to know, and if he pursues it, the court will establish paternity. But you're not required to walk up to his door. Is it the right thing to do? Clara asked. Patricia looked at her. That's not a legal question, I know. I'm asking you as a person. Patricia was quiet for a moment. The right thing depends on what you believe a father is. If you believe a father is someone who shows up because they're told to, because a legal document says they must then notify him and let the law handle the rest. If you believe a father is someone who chooses to show up, then wait. Let him become someone worth choosing first. If he ever does. Clara had thought about that answer for 3 more months. She had thought about it while her company expanded into 14 stores. While she hired her first full-time employee, a 26-year-old operations coordinator named Marcus, who had applied with a cover letter so and specific she had called him the same day. While she reformulated her flagship product line based on 6 months of consumer feedback and watched the reorder rates climb again. While she moved into a real apartment with an extra room that she painted the softest shade of yellow she could find because she had always believed yellow was a hopeful color. By the time Noah arrived, she would not contact Alexander. Not yet, not now, maybe not ever. The decision would depend on the man he became, not the man he had been. And the man he had been had sent her through a side entrance and signed the end of their marriage with a single letter. That man had not yet earned the right to know his son's name. Noah was 3 months old the first time Clara took him to the office. She had hired 3 more people by then: a marketing director, a supply chain specialist, and a part-time bookkeeper, and the Bennett Naturals office was a real office now, with a proper lease and a conference table and a coffee machine that worked, and her name on the door in clean black letters. She walked in with Noah in a carrier against her chest, because the sitter had canceled and she had a meeting with 2 grocery chain buyers she had been working toward for 6 weeks. And she was not canceling that meeting for anything short of a natural disaster. Marcus looked up from his desk when she walked in. He said, "Say nothing," Clara said. "I'm saying nothing. He'll sleep through the meeting if I keep moving. Absolutely. If anyone has a problem with it, they can reschedule." "No one has a problem with it," Marcus said. The grocery chain buyers, 2 men in their 40s who had seen every kind of pitch and presentation and founder theater the food industry had to offer, looked at Noah in the carrier when Clara sat across the conference table from them. One of them cleared his throat. "My daughter just had her first," he said. "How old?" Clara asked. 6 hard age, Clara said. "It gets easier at 4 months, or so I'm told." Something shifted in the room, not unprofessionally, not in a way that compromised the meeting, but in the human way that a real moment sometimes shifts a room. She gave the best pitch of her career with Noah sleeping against her chest. The buyer said yes to both regional chains. Marcus whooped so loudly in the hallway that Noah woke up, and Clara had to walk in circles for 4 minutes before he settled again. By the time Noah was 6 months old, Bennett Naturals was in 63 stores across 4 states. By the time he was 9 months old and pulling himself upright against the furniture of their apartment, with the concentrated determination of someone who had decided walking was a project worth all available resources, the number was 112. Clara worked nights when Noah slept. She worked early mornings before he woke. She worked through lunch at her desk with the baby monitor propped beside her keyboard. She hired a full-time nanny, a calm, steady woman named Rosario who loved Noah with a ferocity that Clara found both deeply reassuring and occasionally necessary to manage, because Rosario had opinions about nap schedules that she expressed at volume. She did not date, she did not have the bandwidth for it, and she did not particularly want it. What she wanted was the company and her son and the small, real life she was constructing day by day in Chicago. She wanted the Tuesday evenings at Diane's kitchen table and the Sunday mornings when she and Noah lay on the floor of their apartment and she read to him from books he was too young to understand, but listened to anyway with the polite, considering expression of someone taking notes. She wanted the work, the genuine, purposeful, hers work of building something from nothing. She had forgotten in the 8 years of marble floors and chandeliers and being someone's wife how much she loved to work. She had forgotten that she was very good at it. 2 years after leaving Beverly Hills with one suitcase, Bennett Naturals crossed $100 million in projected annual revenue. Clara got the number from her CFO, a serious woman named Janet, who had joined the company at year 1 and had the particular quality of delivering both good and bad news in exactly the same tone, which Clara considered one of her most valuable professional characteristics. Janet put the projection on the table at the Monday morning leadership meeting. The room went quiet. Marcus, who had been with Clara since the beginning, since the rescheduled distributor calls and the borrowed kitchen table, put down his coffee. Clara, I see it, she said. 100, I see it, Marcus. She looked at the number for a long moment. She let herself feel it, not the money, not the prestige, not the validation, the meaning of it. The fact that this number represented a real thing she had built from a philosophy written in a notebook in a borrowed room. The fact that every person on her team had jobs because of a decision she had made in a parking lot on Halsted Street. She looked up at her team. Good, she said. Now let's talk about how we get to 200. But something else was happening that year. Something Clara was not watching and had no reason to watch, because she had made a deliberate and complete decision to stop watching it. Alexander Whitmore's empire was starting to show cracks. She heard it first from Patricia Huang, who had kept careful track of Whitmore Enterprises the way a good attorney keeps track of things that might eventually become relevant. His Q3 numbers were soft, Patricia mentioned over coffee one October afternoon. Below projections by 23%, there's talk of board instability. Clara looked at her coffee cup. That's not my concern, it's not, Patricia agreed. I'm telling you because it might become relevant to Noah's situation eventually. How, if his financial position changes significantly, and if you ever decide to establish formal paternity and support arrangements. I'll let you know when I'm ready to have that conversation, Clara said. Of course, she drove home that day and didn't think about Alexander Whitmore. She picked up Noah from Rosario. She made dinner. She read 3 books on the floor. She gave the bath that involved more water outside the tub than inside it, and never stopped being, no matter how many times it happened. And she put her son to bed. She stood in the doorway of his room after he fell asleep. He slept the same way she slept, one arm thrown over his head, completely certain in his rest, as though sleep was a thing he had earned and intended to enjoy fully. She thought about what she was building, not the company. The life. The specific, deliberate, joyful life she was constructing for this child. He was going to know his worth. He was going to know it from birth, from the way she spoke to him and the choices she made and the example she set. He was not going to grow up in a house where love came with conditions, where his value was tied to surfaces, where the word embarrassment was used for a person who deserved only honor. She owed him that. She turned off the light and went back to work. 3 months later, on a Wednesday morning in January, Patricia Huang called her before 8 o'clock. Clara was at her desk with coffee, reviewing January projections. Noah at daycare. The early morning calls from Patricia were never casual. Tell me, Clara said when she answered. Whitmore Enterprises is in serious trouble, Patricia said. The board is fracturing. 2 major institutional investors have reduced their positions. There's a piece running in the Wall Street Journal next week about leadership concerns. Clara set down her coffee. How serious? Serious enough that the company is vulnerable. There are acquisition conversations happening. I've heard 3 different names in the last 2 weeks. Clara was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me this at 8 in the morning? Patricia? Patricia paused, and in that pause, Clara heard something she hadn't been expecting. Because one of the names I've heard, Patricia said carefully, is Bennett Capital. Bennett Capital was into Gerald Foster's fund. Gerald Foster, who had said no in February and yes in June, and who had been on Clara's board for 2 years and had become, in that time, one of the most straightforward and effective partners she had ever worked with. Gerald is looking at Whitmore, Clara said. Gerald's fund is one of several looking, Patricia said. I don't know his position, but Clara, if a Bennett Capital-affiliated entity acquired a controlling stake in Whitmore Enterprises, she stopped. Clara finished the thought. Then I would have leverage, Clara said quietly. More than leverage, Patricia said. You would have majority control. Clara stood up from her desk. She walked to the window of her office. The Chicago skyline spread out in front of her, enormous, indifferent, real. She thought about the side entrance. She thought about the notary who had witnessed her signature and hadn't needed to say anything to say everything. She thought about Noah, about his arm thrown over his head in sleep, about his face, which was so completely his own and also unmistakably a face she recognized. She thought about a woman in a burgundy gown standing at the top of a staircase, believing she had a right to walk down it. Patricia, she said. Yes, set up a meeting with Gerald. The meeting happened 48 hours later. She drove to Gerald's office herself. She sat across the same desk where she had laid her 6-month data 3 years ago. Gerald looked at her with the expression he used when he was processing something that was more complex than the surface of it. You know what you're asking, he said. I know exactly what I'm asking, Clara said. This isn't business, he said. Not entirely. It's entirely business, she said. The fact that I have a personal history with the company makes me a better informed investor, not a less legitimate one. I know Whitmore Enterprises better than any outside party walking in cold. I know its actual structure versus its projected image. I know where the real value is and where the numbers have been managed for optics. Gerald studied her. If this becomes public, when it becomes public, she corrected. When it becomes public, he agreed, it will be the story of the year. Former wife acquires controlling interest in ex-husband's struggling empire. The press will be relentless, I know. Your company's brand is built on authenticity and personal truth. That kind of coverage could be a liability or an asset, depending on how it's handled. I'll handle it, she said. He leaned forward. I need to ask you directly. Is this revenge? She looked at him across the desk. She thought about the question genuinely, not defensively. She had been asking herself a version of the same question for 48 hours. No, she said, it's correction. He was quiet for a moment. What's the difference? Revenge is about making someone feel pain, she said. Correction is about restoring accurate value. Alexander's company is underperforming because its leadership has confused reputation management with actual leadership. That's a solvable problem. I know how to solve it. That's what I'm bringing to the table, and the personal dimension. She met his eyes. There's a 5-year-old child who deserves to know his father, she said. And a father who doesn't yet know his son exists. I want that conversation to happen on honest ground. Not in a lawyer's office, not through intermediaries, not in a way that allows anyone to control the narrative. I want it to happen in a room where the actual balance of power is visible to everyone. Gerald Foster sat back in his chair. He looked at her for a long time. You've thought about this, he said. I've thought about everything, she said. He opened the folder on his desk. Let's talk numbers, he said. The acquisition took 4 months. It was structured carefully, legally, completely. Patricia was involved in every stage. Gerald's fund participated. 3 other investors Clara had built relationships with over 5 years joined the consortium. The paperwork was completed on a Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, Clara called a board meeting at Whitmore Enterprises. She had never been in the Whitmore boardroom. In 8 years of marriage, Alexander had never brought her to his office, not once. Not for any event, any milestone, any occasion. She had existed in his professional life the way a person exists on a piece of paper referenced occasionally. Never present, she dressed carefully that morning. Not for him, not for the board or the investors or whatever journalists would eventually write about this day. She dressed carefully because she had always dressed carefully, because the woman who chose her grandmother's pearl earrings for the gala was still here, still operating on the belief that you put on your best self not for an audience but for yourself. She wore white. She took the car service. She sat in the back seat and she looked out the window. At Los Angeles she had flown in the night before, and she thought about the last time she had been in this city. Standing on the sidewalk outside an attorney's office, looking up at the same enormous sky, she thought, I told you I was just beginning. Rosario had Noah. He was at daycare. He didn't know where his mother was going today or why. He knew only that she had hugged him for a very long time before she left and kissed his forehead twice and said, I love you, Bubba. Everything's going to be okay, he had said. With the devastating pragmatism of a 5-year-old who had a schedule to keep. Okay, Mama, can I have the truck? She had given him the truck. She was still smiling about it when the car pulled up to Whitmore Enterprises. She got out. She walked through the front entrance. And then Clara Bennett walked into Alexander Whitmore's boardroom and sat at the head of his table. The room was already full when she entered, 12 people. Board members, attorneys, senior leadership. She recognized 2 of them from the years when she had attended company events as the invisible wife. Neither of them recognized her. She opened her folder. She arranged her documents. She waited. The door opened. Alexander walked in. He was exactly as she remembered and completely different. 5 years had touched him in the ways they touch men who have been under sustained pressure, a little thinner, a little more careful in his movements, the particular controlled quality of a man who had stopped trusting anything to luck. He scanned the room. His eyes moved to the head of the table. He stopped. The color left his face so completely and so quickly that the man beside him noticed and put a hand on his arm. Alexander did not respond to the hand on his arm. He was looking at Clara. She looked back at him, steady, certain, without performance. And in the silence that fell over the room, the total, ringing, extraordinary silence of 12 people, suddenly understanding that they were witnessing something that went far beyond a board meeting, Clara opened her mouth and said, very clearly, my name is Clara Bennett. I am the new majority owner of Whitmore Enterprises. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Alexander did not move. He was still standing in the doorway. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something he cannot immediately make sense of, not with anger, not with calculation, but with the naked, unguarded expression of a person who has just been confronted with the full weight of their own choices. Clara held his gaze. She did not look away. She had spent 8 years looking away. She had spent 8 years making herself smaller, making herself quieter, making herself easier to manage. She had spent 8 years cooperating with her own erasure. She was done cooperating, Mr. Whitmore, she said. I believe your seat is on the right. He sat down. And the board meeting began. But the real moment, the one that would define everything that came after, had not happened yet. Because Clara had arranged something for the end of the meeting. When the business portion was complete, when the formal agenda had been addressed and the attorneys had asked their questions, and the board had processed the reality of the new ownership structure, Clara looked at her watch. She nodded to the person outside the door. The door opened, and a small boy with dark hair and Alexander's eyes came running into the boardroom, straight to Clara, and said, Mama, Rosario said I could have ice cream if I was good. Was I good? Clara put her arm around him. She looked across the table. She did not need to say anything. Alexander Whitmore was looking at his son for the first time. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The boy looked up at the man across the table with the uncomplicated curiosity of a child who did not yet know what was happening but understood. In the instinctive way children understand things, that this moment was important. Hi, Noah said. Alexander's eyes filled. Clara watched it happen. She did not feel triumph. She had been afraid in the weeks leading up to this moment that she would feel triumph and that the feeling would tell her something ugly about herself. But she did not feel it. What she felt was something quieter and more complicated, the feeling of a truth finally becoming visible. A correction becoming real. She had said to Gerald Foster, correction, not revenge. She had meant it. She looked at her son. She looked at the man across the table who had once asked her to use the side entrance. And she said quietly, in a voice only Alexander could hear, His name is Noah. He's 5 years old, and he deserves better than the version of you that exists right now." Alexander looked at her. For the first time in all the years she had known him, he had no answer. He had nothing, and Clara Bennett, who had once walked out of a Beverly Hills mansion with one suitcase believing she had lost everything, looked at her son's face and understood completely that she had won nothing she hadn't already had. She had just made it visible. The boardroom cleared in 12 minutes. Clara had watched it happen with the particular attention she gave to everything: the attorneys gathering their folders, the board members exchanging glances that carried entire conversations, the senior leadership filing out with the careful, controlled movements of people who understood that whatever they said in the next 48 hours would be repeated and analyzed. They left quickly, not from disrespect, from instinct. The room had the charged, pressurized quality of a space where something enormous had just shifted. And experienced people knew when to clear the blast radius. Noah had been taken back to the hallway by Rosario, who had read the room with the same competence she brought out to everything, and quietly said, "Come, mijo, let's find that ice cream," before the last attorney had reached the door. Noah had gone without complaint, which meant he had already spotted the ice cream situation and was managing his priorities. And then the room was empty, except for 2 people. Alexander had not moved from his chair. He sat at the right side of the table with his name on the building above it, and he sat there with his hands flat in front of him, looking at nothing, or looking at everything, or looking at the particular space between the present moment and all the choices that had produced it. Clara closed her folder. She did not speak first. She had learned, over 5 years of building a company, that the person who speaks first in a silence like this one is the person who cannot tolerate it. And Clara had become a woman who could tolerate a great deal. Alexander spoke first. "How long have you known?" he said. His voice was different, not the boardroom voice, the practiced, modulated voice of a man who had spent years performing authority. This was the voice underneath that one, the one she had heard at 2 a.m. in a cold apartment when the company wouldn't survive, when he had turned to her in the dark and said, "Clara, what if I'm wrong about all of it?" That voice, the real one. She had not heard it in a very long time. "I've known about Noah since before he was born," she said. He looked up. "That's not what I meant." "I know." She met his eyes. "You're asking why I didn't tell you. He's 5 years old." "Clara, yes." His voice broke slightly on the number and he pressed his jaw tight to contain it. "I have a 5-year-old son and I didn't know." "No," she said. "You didn't." He pushed back from the table and stood up. He needed to move. She remembered that about him. He processed things physically. When something was too large to sit with, he moved. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her. "You should have told me," he said. Clara felt something move in her chest. Not anger. Something more measured than anger. The particular clarity that comes from having spent 5 years thinking through exactly this conversation. Exactly this moment. "Should I have?" she said. It was not a question. He turned around. "He's my son, and you made it very clear what your relationship to that word looks like," she said quietly. "You made it clear at the gala. You made it clear in the kitchen. You made it clear when you left papers on the counter and signed your name with a single letter." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "You told me I was an embarrassment. You told me things had changed. You handed me a check in an apartment and sent me away. And you are now standing in front of me asking why I didn't come back to tell you something I knew you would use." He flinched. "Use," he said. "Yes." She held his gaze. "I didn't know who you were going to become. I only knew who you had been, and the man you had been would have turned Noah into a negotiating point. A custody arrangement designed by attorneys, a line item in a legal document. My son was not going to be a line item." He was quiet for a long moment. She could see him processing it, could see the particular internal work of a man confronting the logical consequences of his own actions and finding them impossible to argue with. "That's not fair," he said finally, but the fight had gone out of the words before they finished leaving his mouth. Alexander, she leaned forward slightly. What you did to me was not fair. What your mother said about me while you stood silent was not fair. What you asked me to do at the hotel entrance, go through the side door, tell the driver to take me home, don't call, none of that was fair. You don't get to invoke fairness now, that account is empty. He sat back down. He put his face in his hands. Clara watched him. She had imagined this moment. In different versions across 5 years, she had imagined it with more anger on her part, more drama. She had imagined herself saying things that would cut precisely and leave marks. She had imagined him begging and herself unmoved. The reality was different from every version. The reality was a man in an expensive suit sitting at the head of a table he no longer controlled, with his face in his hands, and a woman across from him who had spent 5 years becoming someone he never imagined she could be, and between them an absence shaped exactly like a 5-year-old boy with dark hair. She did not feel triumphant, she felt tired, the specific, earned exhaustion of a person who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and has finally set it down. What do you want? He said. His face was still in his hands. To be clear, she said, I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to punish you. The acquisition of Whitmore Enterprises is a legitimate business decision with legitimate business rationale. I am the best person to restructure this company and return it to actual health rather than managed optics. That is the truth regardless of our history. He lifted his face. His eyes were red, and Noah, he said, Noah deserves a father, she said. Not a man who happened to contribute DNA, a father. Someone who shows up, who chooses him. Not because a court ordered it and not because it's good for your image. Because he is a child who is remarkable and funny and stubborn as hell, and he deserves to have every person in his life who can love him, actually loving him. Alexander's throat worked. He's stubborn, he said. And despite everything, despite the weight of the room and the years, and the accounting of wrongs between them, there was something helpless and hopeful in the question. The instinct of a father reaching for any piece of information about a person he had missed entirely. Profoundly, Clara said, he negotiated the terms of his bedtime for 3 months before I realized I was being outmaneuvered by a 4-year-old. Something moved across Alexander's face. Not quite a smile, the ghost of one. Shape of a man who was beginning to understand something about what he had lost, in real terms, in human terms, and was not yet sure he could hold that understanding without breaking. I want to meet him, Alexander said. I know, not I mean properly. Not like today, not in a boardroom. He paused. That wasn't. I didn't know he was going to be here. I know you didn't, Clara said. That was deliberate. He looked at her. I needed you to see him before you had time to prepare, she said. Before you could manage the moment, I needed your real reaction. Not the performed one. And you cried, she said simply. That was enough. Slowly. What happens now, he said. Now, Clara said, we do this properly. You'll have an attorney contact Patricia Huang. We'll establish a formal arrangement, paternity, schedule, responsibilities. It won't be casual and it won't be flexible in the early stages, because Noah needs consistency above everything else. He's 5. He's been in a stable, predictable, loving environment his entire life. I am not going to disrupt that for anyone's convenience. Understood. And Alexander. She waited until she had his full attention. If you show up for him, and then stop showing up, if you decide 6 months from now that fatherhood is complicated and your schedule is demanding, and it would be easier to be occasional, that's the last chance you get. I will not let him be someone you visit when it's convenient. He doesn't know yet what he's missing, but he will. Children always figure out what they're missing. I understand, he said. I need you to mean that. I mean it. She studied him. She had spent 15 years reading his face, knowing the difference between the words he believed and the words he was producing to manage a situation. What she saw now was not performance. It was a man genuinely, painfully arriving somewhere he should have arrived a long time ago. All right, she said. She picked up her folder. She stood. Clara, she stopped. The company. He paused. What are your actual plans for it? She almost smiled. Even now, even in the middle of all of this, the businessman in him could not stay fully submerged. She respected it, actually. Restructure the leadership team. Refocus the core product line on what actually works rather than what photographs well. Rebuild investor trust through 12 months of genuine transparency rather than managed messaging. She picked up her bag. Basically, run it the way you should have been running it instead of spending 3 years trying to look like you were running it perfectly. He was quiet. That's fair, he said. It's accurate, she corrected. Fair is a different conversation. She walked toward the door. She told me, he said suddenly. My mother, she told me last year. About the earrings. Stopped. She turned slowly. He was looking at the table. She heard it from someone, some old connection from those early years. She told me what you sold to cover payroll, what it actually was. Clara said nothing. I didn't know, he said, about what they were. I thought you found an investor. I thought. He stopped. I didn't ask. I should have asked, she said. You should have. Your mother's earrings, he said it quietly, with the weight of a man who was only now understanding the full cost of a thing. You sold your mother's earrings for my company, for our company, she said. That's what I believed it was. He pressed his hand over his mouth. She watched him absorb it, the full truth of it finally. After all these years, not the sanitized version, the real one. I'm sorry, he said. The words were thick and effortful, not the easy apology of a man who apologized often and efficiently, but the difficult apology of a man who almost never did and was discovering why it was so hard. I know, she said. She turned back toward the door. She had her hand on the handle when he said quietly, Did you do all of this for him, for Noah? She thought about it honestly. I did this for me, she said, and then I kept going for him. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She opened the door. Noah was in the hallway with Rosario, working through an ice cream with the focused intensity of a child who understood that soft serve was a time-sensitive situation. He looked up when he saw Clara. Mama, I got strawberry. I see that, she said. Very good choice. The man inside, Noah said with the casual directness of a 5-year-old for whom all information was equally worth processing. He was looking at me funny. Clara crouched down to his level. She took a breath. That man, she said carefully, is someone I'm going to tell you about soon, when we get home tonight. You and me, okay? We'll talk about it. Noah considered this. Licked his ice cream. Is it a good talk or a big talk? Both, Clara said. Okay, he said agreeably. Can I finish the ice cream first? Absolutely, she said. She stood up and looked at Rosario, who gave her the small, warm nod of a woman who understood far more than she was ever asked about. The 4 of them, Clara, Noah, Rosario, and the strawberry soft serve, walked toward the elevator. 2 weeks later, Alexander Whitmore sat across from his son for the first time in a deliberate, prepared, chosen way. Clara had arranged it carefully. A park near her hotel, Rosario nearby but not hovering. She had explained to Noah the night before as clearly and honestly and age-appropriately as she could manage that his father was a person who existed, who was going to be part of his life now, who was very much looking forward to meeting him. Noah had listened with his particular concentrated attention. Then he had said, "Does he like trucks?" Clara had texted Alexander at 11 that night. He'd texted back within 30 seconds, "Tell him I love trucks." She'd smiled at her phone in the dark of her hotel room. Put it down, picked it up again. She typed, "He's going to test you." He tests everyone, Alexander. I expect that. Clara, don't make promises you won't keep. He remembers everything. Alexander, I know. Clara, I'll be there. Clara, I know you will. That's why I arranged this. She put the phone down. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about the woman who had stood at the top of a staircase in a burgundy gown, who had held her breath and waited for her husband to look up and smile, who had believed, right up until the moment she stopped believing, that love was enough to survive being treated as invisible. She thought about that woman with something that was not quite pity and not quite love, but something in between. Something like recognition, like the feeling of seeing a younger version of yourself across a room and wanting to say, You're going to be okay. It's going to hurt like nothing you've ever felt. And then you're going to be okay. The park meeting lasted 2 hours. Noah ran Alexander through an extensive truck-related interview within the first 4 minutes. Alexander answered every question with the earnest seriousness of a man who had prepared for the most important meeting of his life, which was exactly what it was. Clara sat on a bench and watched. She watched Alexander crouch down to Noah's level, the specific, chosen act of making yourself physically smaller so a child doesn't have to reach, and she felt something unlock in her chest. Not forgiveness, not exactly. Forgiveness was a longer project. Something more immediate, the recognition of a capacity in him she had wondered if he still had. He had it. It was in there under all the marble and the Forbes covers and the image management. The real person, the man from the cold apartment who had said, "You and me," he was still in there, just buried now. Inch by inch he was digging himself out. After the park, after Noah had been returned to Rosario and was deeply asleep in the back seat of the car, Alexander walked Clara to her waiting car. They stood on the sidewalk. "He called me Alex," Alexander said. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard in years. Wonder, simple, unmanaged wonder. "He does that with everyone," Clara said. "He decides what he's going to call you. I didn't correct him." "Good," he looked at her. "You did an extraordinary job with him." She accepted that. She didn't deflect it or minimize it. "I know," she said. He almost smiled. "You've gotten harder. I've gotten honest," she corrected. "Those aren't the same thing," he nodded slowly. They stood in the particular loaded silence of two people who had a history that couldn't be erased and a future that was still being shaped. "I want to do this right," he said. "Then do it," she said simply. "That's all it takes. Just keep showing up." She got in the car. She did not look back this time either. 3 months into the Whitmore Enterprises restructure, Clara fired Alexander's chief of staff. The man, loyal, thoroughly competent person named Daniel Reeves, who had been with Alexander for 7 years, had been. Clara discovered the primary architect of Alexander's public image strategy. Every managed photograph, every carefully worded press release, every event where Clara had been strategically absent, Daniel Reeves had been the one providing the blueprint. She found out on a Tuesday afternoon when she was going through 3 years of communications files as part of the restructure audit. She sat in the conference room with the files open in front of her, and she'd read them to Alexander, dated approximately 14 months before the gala, where Clara had been told to use the side entrance. The memo was titled "Brand Alignment Personal Life Optics." She read it once, then again, then she set it down. She called Alexander. He answered on the second ring. "Clara, did you know Daniel Reeves wrote a strategy document about removing me from your public profile?" Silence. "Alexander, I knew he had recommendations," he said. "I didn't know the full extent. The memo is 9 pages, she said. "It includes a 12-month timeline for graceful de-emphasis of non-aligned personal associations. I am the non-aligned personal association." He said nothing. "He wrote it 14 months before the gala," she said. "You were following a strategy, a documented strategy. Written by your chief of staff." "Claire, not calling you for an apology," she said. "I'm calling to tell you that Daniel Reeves no longer works for this company as of 5 o'clock today. And I'm calling to ask you, once directly, how much of those 3 years was you, and how much was a strategy you were handed?" The silence was different this time. Heavier. "Both," he said. "It was both. The strategy gave me permission to do something I was already. It made it easier. It gave it language to. I was ashamed," he said. "Clara, I know that's not. I know you were ashamed," she said. "I lived inside that shame for 3 years. I'm asking you now because I need to understand the full picture. For Noah. Not for me. For him. Because one day he's going to ask me questions about who his father was, and I need to be able to answer honestly." He was quiet for a long moment. "I was ashamed," he said again, "and I was weak, and I let someone hand me a framework that made the weakness feel like strategy. And I told myself it was business and it was image, and it was what success required, and I would not look at what I was actually doing to you." His voice had gone very quiet. I didn't want to see it, because if I saw it clearly, I would have had to admit who I was becoming, and I liked who I was becoming. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. She sat with it for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not making me dig for it." She terminated Daniel Reeves's contract at 5 o'clock exactly. She did it herself, in the way she did everything that mattered, without delegation. Without distance. Daniel Reeves did not argue. He looked at her across the desk, and she thought she saw, beneath the professional composure, something that might have been relief. The particular relief of a person who has been maintaining a thing they knew was wrong for so long that having it end feels like setting down a weight they'd forgotten they were carrying. "I was doing my job," he said. "I know," she said. "And now you're not." He nodded once. He picked up his things. He left. The restructure continued. Over the following month, Clara rebuilt Whitmore Enterprises from the inside out. Not brutally, not as a demonstration of power. She had told Gerald Foster the truth. She was the best person for this job, and she was going to do it properly. She brought in new leadership in 3 key departments. She eliminated the image management budget, a line item so large it had been masquerading as marketing, and redirected those resources into actual product development. She commissioned a genuine independent audit and released the results publicly, including the parts that were unflattering, because she had built her own company on the principle that transparency was not a vulnerability but a foundation. The press had the story they'd been expecting: former wife takes over ex-husband's empire, and they wrote it with the dramatic energy the headline deserved. Clara gave 2 interviews. Direct, honest. She did not perform victimhood. She did not perform triumph. She talked about the business. She talked about the restructure. She talked about Bennett Naturals and what it had taught her about building something real versus building something that looked real. She did not talk about Alexander personally. She did not talk about Noah. Some journalist pushed. She declined without apology, in the direct and slightly amused way of a woman who had survived far worse than an aggressive interview. Diane called after the second interview aired. "You were extraordinary," Diane said. "I was accurate," Clara said. "Same thing," Diane said. "Also, Patrick wants me to tell you that he always knew you were going to be famous." Patrick cried. "At the Bennett Naturals anniversary party," Clara said. "He is not a reliable narrator," he cried, because Marcus gave a very moving speech. Marcus is 29 years old, and he gave a speech that made a room full of adults weep. "That's a different conversation," she heard Diane laughing. Real, full laughter. The laughter of who had been enough of life with another person to find a joy in their joy. "Are you happy?" Diane asked when the laughter settled. Clara thought about it honestly. She thought about Noah, who had started calling Alexander Alex, and had decided, with the sovereign authority of a 5-year-old, that Alex was allowed to read exactly 2 books at bedtime, but
not a 3,
because 3 was Mama's number. She thought about the Whitmore restructure and the Bennett Naturals expansion, and the Tuesday morning she had walked into her Chicago office to find that her team had decorated the conference room because the company had just crossed $200 million in projected revenue. She thought about the moment in the boardroom when she had sat at the head of Alexander's table and said her name clearly, in her own voice, to a room full of people who needed to hear it. She thought about a woman standing at the top of a staircase in a burgundy gown. "Yes," she said, "I think I actually am." "Good," Diane said. "You took long enough." Clara smiled at her phone. Outside her office window, Chicago was doing what Chicago did: enormous and indifferent and real. Full of people building things and losing things and starting over. The whole enormous ordinary machinery of a city that did not stop for anyone's grief and did not need to, because grief had never stopped anyone worth knowing for long. She had a 4 o'clock call with her CFO. She had a 6 o'clock pickup of Noah from daycare. She had a company and a son and a life that was entirely, completely, irreversibly hers. She picked up her pen. She got back to work. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning in September, 9 months after the boardroom. Clara was at her desk at 6:45. the way she always was, coffee going cold beside her laptop the way it always did. Noah's crayon drawing of what he insisted was a rocket ship but looked considerably more like a sweet tape to the wall beside her monitor, the way it always was. Marcus knocked twice and came in without waiting, which was his standard operating procedure, and something she had long since stopped correcting. He put an envelope on her desk, not an email, an actual envelope, cream-colored with embossed letterhead, that came by courier this morning, he said. She looked at it without picking it up. The return address was the American Enterprise Leadership Foundation. She had heard of them. Everyone in her industry had heard of them. They gave one award per year, one to one person, the America's Most Inspiring Entrepreneur Award, which had existed for 22 years and had been given to 22 people, none of whom had built what they built the way Clara had built hers. "Open it," Marcus said. "I can see what it is from here, then open it faster." She picked up the envelope. She opened it with the letter opener Noah had given her for her birthday because he had found it in a gift shop and decided it looked important. She read the letter once. She set it down. "Well," Marcus said. "They want to give me the award," she said. Marcus made a sound that was not quite a word. He turned around and walked out of her office. She heard him in the hallway say something to the marketing director, whose name was Priya, and then she heard Priya make a sound that was also not quite a word. And then she heard both of them coming back. Priya appeared in the doorway beside Marcus. "Is it real?" Priya said. "It's real," Clara said. Priya looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Priya. They looked at Clara. "Clara," Priya said. "It's one award," Clara said. "It's the award," Marcus said. "There is a difference between an award and the award, and I need you to understand that right now." Clara looked at the letter again. The ceremony was in New York, December 15th, Lincoln Center. Black tie, an audience of 3,000 people including every major name in American business, media, and public life. She thought about a woman who had been asked to use the side entrance of a hotel. She thought about a woman who had stood on a sidewalk in Los Angeles looking up at the sky. She thought about a parking lot on Halsted Street. "Book the flights," she said. Marcus was already on his phone. She called Diane before she called anyone else. Diane picked up on the first ring, which meant she was already awake, which meant Patrick had early baseball practice, which meant it was a Tuesday or a Thursday. "I got something in the mail," Clara said. "Good something or complicated something?" The American Enterprise Leadership Foundation silence. Then Clara Bennett, "Don't, I am going to cry." "Please don't, I am already crying," Diane said. "I started crying before you finished saying the name of the foundation. I anticipated it." Clara smiled at her desk. "I need you in New York on December 15th. I was going to say the same thing," Diane said. "Also, Patrick, he's going to lose his mind. He's going to tell every parent at every baseball practice between now and December that his wife's friend, his friend Clara Bennett, is receiving the most important entrepreneurship award in the country, and they are going to have to hear about it repeatedly and in detail." Clara laughed. The full, real laugh that had surprised her the first time she'd heard it after the divorce, the one that still felt like a gift every time it arrived. She had one more call to make. She sat with her phone for a moment after she hung up with Diane. She had not spoken to Alexander about anything personal in 3 weeks. The restructure of Whitmore Enterprises had entered a more stable phase. The new leadership team was operating independently. The investor communications were normalized. The transparency audit had produced the positive market response she had predicted it would. She and Alexander communicated primarily through their respective attorneys now on the business side, and through a careful, functional, evolving co-parenting arrangement on the Noah side. It was working, not easily, not without friction, but working. She picked up her phone and called him. He answered on the third ring. "Clara, I got a call from the American Enterprise Leadership Foundation this morning," she said. A pause, then the award. "Yes, Clara." His voice was different from the boardroom voice and different from the cold apartment voice. Something she didn't quite have a category for yet. "That's congratulations. That's genuinely remarkable." "I know," she said. She heard him exhale, a sound that contained more than it showed. December 15th, she said. Lincoln Center. I wanted you to know before it becomes public. Why, he said. Not defensively, genuinely, she thought about how to answer. Because Noah is going to hear about it, she said. And I want him to hear about it from both of us together. I want him to understand that both his parents are, she paused, adults who can be in the same room and tell him something important. Silence. Can you be in the same room for that, she said. Yes, he said immediately. This weekend then, Saturday morning. He wants to go to the park again anyway. I'll be there, he said. He was there, 7 minutes early. Noah spotted him from 30 feet away and ran with the full-body commitment of a child who had not yet learned to moderate enthusiasm, which Clara considered one of his greatest qualities. Alex, I learned to pump my legs on the swing. Alexander caught him. Lifted him, the ease of it, the physical ease. The way his arms knew exactly how to receive this particular child was something that had been developing over 9 mornings, and it was one of the things Clara watched with the attention she gave to things that mattered. He was showing up every Saturday without exception. Without excuse, he had missed a board meeting that had run catastrophically over, and he had called her himself, not his assistant, at 6 in the morning to tell her and to ask if Sunday would work. And she had said yes, and he had been there Sunday with 30 minutes to spare. He was learning what it meant to be chosen by a child. That it was not something you were given, it was something you earned. Incrementally through the accumulation of ordinary moments. Through being there when you said you would be. Through knowing that he preferred strawberry to chocolate. Through understanding that the truck with the missing wheel was still the most important truck. He was learning it. Clara watched him swing Noah through the air and she thought, good, keep going. They sat on the bench while Noah attacked the playground with his customary strategic intensity. She told Noah about the award in the simple, honest way she told him everything. Mama's getting an award, she said, a really big one. In New York City. Noah considered this. For the food company? For the food company and for everything I built. Are we going to New York? You and me and Rosario and Aunt Diane, she said. He processed this carefully, and Clara looked at Alexander. Alexander was looking at Noah. Yeah, buddy, Alexander said. I'll be there too. Noah nodded, satisfied. Good, he said. New York has big trucks. He slid off the bench and ran back toward the playground. They sat in silence for a moment. Thank you, Alexander said quietly. For what? For including me in that. She looked at the playground. At Noah, who was currently attempting to negotiate access to a disputed piece of equipment with a child twice his size, using the particular combination of confidence and charm that Clara recognized as entirely his own. He wanted you there, she said. That's not me, that's him. I know, Alexander said. That's why I'm thanking you. She understood what he meant. She was the one who had created the conditions in which Noah could want Alexander there. She had not spoken badly of his father. She had not filled the space where a father should have been with bitterness or absence or complicated adult grief. She had kept that space clean and open and available. She had done it for Noah, not for Alexander, but she understood what he was thanking her for. He's a good kid, she said. He's an incredible kid, Alexander said. And the simplicity and completeness of it, the way it landed without qualification or performance, told her something. He was getting there. The weeks between that Saturday and December 15th moved the way time something. Enormous is approaching simultaneously, too slow and too fast. Marked by the ordinary days that felt significant simply because of what was coming after them. Bennett Naturals hit $240 million in annual revenue in November. Clara received the number from Janet at the Monday morning leadership meeting, and the room reacted the way rooms react when a number arrives that is larger than anyone had said out loud before. Marcus put down his coffee again. Clara had started timing this. Janet, Marcus said. I know, Janet said. 240 million, Janet said. Yes, Clara looked at the number. She let herself sit with it for exactly as long as it deserved. Which was longer than she usually allowed for numbers, Because this one was different, not because of what it represented in terms of wealth or success or market position. Because of what it represented in terms of what was possible. She had started with a notebook in a borrowed room. She had started with $20,000 and a philosophy. She had started with the knowledge that she had been told she was an embarrassment, and the decision, made in the parking lot of a medical center, that she was going to be the opposite of whatever that word meant. $240 million later, she had kept that decision. Next year, we target 300, she said. Let's talk about how. The night before the ceremony, she was in her hotel room in New York at 11 when she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She answered, "Is this Clara Bennett?" The voice was female. Older, careful. "Yes, this is Margaret Whitmore." Clara went very still. She had not spoken to Alexander's mother since the night she had heard her voice through a cracked door. Since the word embarrassment had traveled through a wall and changed everything. "Margaret," she said, "I know this is..." A pause. "I know you have no reason to take this call." "I took it," Clara said. "Yes," another pause. "I'm in New York. I'm attending the ceremony tomorrow." "Alexander told me about it, all right." "I wanted to..." Margaret stopped. Clara heard something in the silence she had not expected. The quality of a woman choosing words carefully, not because she was managing a situation, but because she genuinely did not trust herself to get this right. "I said something 5 years ago in Alexander's house. I said something that I have been told." She paused again. "That you heard." Clara said nothing. "The word I used," Margaret said, "about you. I have thought about it many times since." Many times. Her voice had gone very quiet. "I want you to know that I was wrong. Not about the business concerns I stand by, that those were real. But the word I chose, the way I characterized you. What I called you, a breath, that was wrong. You were never an embarrassment. You were the only person in my son's life who gave a damn about the actual man. Not the image. I didn't see that then. I see it now." Clara sat on the edge of the hotel bed. She had prepared herself for many things in the lead-up to tomorrow. She had not prepared for this. "Why are you telling me this now?" she said. "Because tomorrow you are going to stand in front of 3,000 people and receive the most significant recognition in American business," Margaret said. "And you deserve to walk onto that stage knowing that the and is in that audience is understanding exactly how wrong she was." Clara breathed in slowly. She thought about the woman who had frozen behind a door, who had waited for her husband to say her name and heard silence instead, who had swallowed that silence and carried it for 3 years, and then carried something heavier, the whole weight of a life she was rebuilding for 5 more. "I appreciate you saying this," Clara said. "I don't expect anything from you," Margaret said quickly. "No forgiveness or relationship or acknowledgement beyond this call." "I wanted to say it, that's all." Margaret, "Yes, Noah has your eyes," Clara said. "I noticed it about 6 months after he was born. I don't know why I'm telling you that." The silence that followed was the longest of the call. When Margaret spoke again, her voice had fractured slightly at the edges. "Just slightly. Enough to be you," she said. "Good night," Clara said. She hung up. She sat on the bed for a long time. She was not going to make that call mean more than it was. She was not going to rewrite Margaret Whitmore into a different person based on one late-night phone call before a ceremony. People were complex and Margaret was complex, and the word embarrassment had still traveled through a wall and still cost what it had cost. But she let the call be what it was, a person trying. In an imperfect, belated, genuine way. Trying, she laid back on the bed and looked at the ceiling. She picked up her phone and texted Noah, "Good night. Bubba, I love you to the moon." Rosario texted back. "He is asleep already, very tired from the big day. He says he loves you to the moon and the stars." I added the stars. He was asleep, but he would have said it. Clara smiled at her phone in the dark. She slept better than she expected. December 15th arrived the way important days always arrive, exactly on schedule. Indifferent to whether you were ready, she was ready. She dressed carefully. Not in the way she had dressed for Alexander's events, where careful meant strategic, where every choice was filtered through the question of what would minimize her presence rather than express it. She dressed carefully in the way she did everything now intentionally, for herself, because she had decided that her presence was worth expressing. She wore dark blue, not safe navy, something deeper and more certain than that. A color that said, I am here and I know it and I have earned my place in this room. She did not wear her grandmother's pearl earrings. Those were gone. She had made peace with that years ago. She had turned their absence into a foundation, in every product on every shelf, into every employee who had a job because she had kept going. She wore diamonds, small, brilliant, entirely her own. Diane arrived at her hotel room at 4 o'clock. She looked at Clara in the doorway and did the thing she had done in the car outside O'Hare Airport, scanned her completely. All of it, what was there and what had changed and what had survived. You look like yourself, Diane said, the fullest version of yourself I've ever seen. Don't make me redo my eye makeup, Clara said. I'm not making any promises, Diane said. They rode to Lincoln Center together. Noah was already there with Rosario in the row reserved for her personal guests, wearing the small dark jacket he had been deeply suspicious of, until Clara told him that important people wore them, at which point he had put it on himself and examined himself in the mirror with serious, professional interest. When Clara arrived backstage, she stood for a moment in the particular stillness of being alone before something enormous. She thought about the notebook in a borrowed room. She thought about Diane's kitchen table. She thought about Gerald Foster across a desk. She thought about the day she had walked into a boardroom and said her name out loud. She thought about Noah's arm thrown over his head in sleep. She thought about a sidewalk in Los Angeles and a sky that didn't care about anyone's plans, and the moment she had looked up at it and known, not hoped, not wished, not prayed, known that she was not done, son. The ceremony ran the way these ceremonies run, beautifully produced, carefully orchestrated, the full machinery of institutional recognition, doing what it was designed to do. There were speeches and presentations and moments that would end up in photographs. Clara sat in the front row with her hands folded, and she listened, and she was present in the specific way she had learned to be present, not performing attention, but actually there, actually in the room, actually inhabiting the moment. When her name was called, she stood. The applause hit her like something physical. 3,000 people, every major name in American business. People she had pitched to, and people who had turned her downtown, and people who had written about her, and people who had watched the acquisition of Whitmore Enterprises with expressions ranging from astonishment to delight to the particular admiration. Reserved for someone who has done something you didn't think was possible. She walked to the stage. She stood at the podium. She looked out at 3,000 faces. And in the fourth row, she found Noah. He was standing on his seat because Noah was 5, and standing on seats was the correct response to seeing your mother walk onto a stage, and he was waving with his whole arm. The broad, certain, unself-conscious wave of a child who has not yet learned that restraint is a virtue. She waved back briefly, personally, just for him. The room laughed warmly at the exchange. She looked at her prepared remarks on the podium. She had written them carefully. She had worked on them for 2 weeks, revising and tightening and finding the right words for the right things. She set them aside. I was going to say something prepared, she said into the microphone. But my son is standing on his chair in the fourth row, and I'm afraid if I read from notes he'll assume I'm not paying attention to him. And I've learned that is never a good assumption to encourage in a 5-year-old. Another laugh. Warmer this time. Real, she looked out at the room. 5 years ago, she said, a man I loved asked me to use the side entrance of a hotel so that the people inside wouldn't know I was connected to him. He was ashamed of the way I looked. He was ashamed of the body I was living in. He had decided that I was a liability to the image he was building. The room had gone very quiet. I used the side entrance, she said, and then I went home. And I sat on the edge of a bed in a gown I had spent 3 weeks choosing, and I let myself understand completely, and without stories, what was actually happening to me. She paused. And then I started over. She looked at Noah in the fourth row. He had stopped waving. He was listening with the concentrated, serious expression of a child who understood that his mother was saying something important. I didn't start over because I wanted to prove something to the man who was ashamed of me, she said. I started over because I am Clara Bennett, and I have never once in my life believed that my worth was something other person got to determine. She let that sit for a moment. I just forgot it for a while, and then I remembered. She looked at the room. At the 3,000 Faces, the company I built, Bennett Naturals, exists because I understood something in the worst moment of my life. I understood that there are millions of women in this country who have been told, in ways large and small and quiet and brutal, that their bodies make them less worthy of nourishment, of care, of pleasure, of space, and I decided that I was going to make products that said the opposite. That said, you are worth taking care of, your body is worth feeding well. Not because you've earned it, not because you've achieved the right size or shape. Because you are a person and you are here and you deserve it. She paused. That is not a complicated idea, she said, but it is an idea the market consistently underestimated. I was grateful for that. I used every underestimation I was given, a ripple through the room. Recognition, the particular laugh of people who knew exactly what she meant. To the women in this room and the women watching, she said, I want to say this as clearly as I can. Someone telling you that you don't belong in a room is information about them. It is not information about you. Use the side entrance if you have to. And then go build the building. The room came to its feet. She stood at the podium while 3,000 people stood, and she held the moment, held the weight of it, held the full specific truth of standing here in this room after everything it had taken to get here, and she did not rush past it. She let it be real. She found Noah in the fourth row. He was standing on his chair again, both arms above his head now, clapping with the unrestrained physical joy of a child who did not know how to be anything less than completely, entirely present. She pressed one hand briefly against her chest. Just for him, after the ceremony in the hallway outside the main hall, Alexander found her. He was standing slightly apart from the crowd, which was his natural position now, present but not pushing. He had been learning over 9 months of Saturday mornings and structured co-parenting what it meant to take up exactly the right amount of space and no more. She walked over to him. He looked at her for a moment. He didn't try to fill the look with words, which was new for him. The old Alexander had filled every silence with something. The man standing in front of her had learned, was still learning how to simply be in a moment without managing it. That speech, he said. Yes, the side entrance. Yes, he absorbed that. I'm glad you said it. She raised an eyebrow. I mean it, he said. I've spent 5 years knowing what I did. Having you say it in front of 3,000 people doesn't change what it was. It just makes it visible, the way things should be visible. He paused. I'm glad it's visible. She studied him. He was not the man from the gala. He was not the man who had left papers on a kitchen counter and signed his name with a single letter. He was not entirely the man from the cold apartment. Either no one gets to go back and be exactly who they were. He was something else, a third thing. A man in the middle of the long, unglamorous, necessary work of becoming someone better. How's the restructure going? She asked. He almost smiled at the shift. Strong Q4, the transparency strategy is working. It always works, she said. I know that now. You always knew it, she said. You just had someone handing you permission to ignore it. He nodded. He did not argue or qualify. Noah appeared between them at that moment, materializing from the crowd with the particular sudden presence of a small child who had been patient long enough and had decided that patience had run its course. Mossy, he said, can we get food? Rosario said there is food. There is food, Clara confirmed. Alex, are you coming for food? Noah said. Alexander looked at Clara. She looked back at him. If it's all right with your mom, Alexander said. Noah turned to Clara. He had the expression he used for important negotiations, the eyebrows slightly raised, the chin forward, the eyes absolutely certain of the outcome. Mama Alex should come for food. He should, Clara agreed. She did not say it for Alexander. She said it for the boy between them who deserved every person in his life who could choose him, actually choosing him. And she said it because she had made herself a promise in a parking lot on Halsted Street in Chicago that she was going to be the kind of woman who did not withhold grace from people who were genuinely trying to earn it. Not because they deserved it automatically, because she deserved to be that kind of woman. They walked together, the three of them, toward the reception hall. Noah between them, holding neither hand but walking in the precise center of the space they made, which was exactly right. Diane appeared from a side corridor. She looked at the three of them, and her expression went through approximately 7 emotions in 2 seconds. She caught Clara's eye. Clara gave her the small, specific look that meant, "I know, don't cry, I know." Diane pressed her lips together and gave Clara the look that meant, "Too late, already crying, you're welcome." Clara looked forward. She thought about the notebook, the philosophy, the borrowed kitchen table, the February cold outside Gerald Foster's office building. The moment she had sat in the parking lot on Halsted Street with both hands flat against her stomach and made a decision she did not yet have words for. She thought about every investor who had not called back, every formulation she had gotten wrong before she got it right. Every night she had worked while Noah slept, every morning she had worked before he woke, every moment she had chosen the harder thing because the harder thing was the real thing, and she had always known the difference. She thought about a woman in a burgundy gown at the top of a staircase, who had believed she had a right to walk down it. She had been right. She had always been right about that. The only thing that had needed to change was the man waiting at the bottom. And that man had not changed. She had simply stopped waiting for him and built her own staircase, in her own building with her name on the door. Clara Bennett walked into the reception hall. She was not the woman Alexander Whitmore had hidden. She was not the woman who had used the side entrance. She was not someone's past, someone's liability, someone's embarrassment, someone's before. She was Clara Bennett, founder, mother. The woman who had started over with $20,000 and a philosophy written in a notebook and had turned it into something that 3,000 people stood to applaud. She was the woman who had remembered, at the bottom of everything, that her worth was not a thing another person could determine, and she was just getting started.